It was 3 o'clock in the night, a light drizzle tapped against the windows, and the city slept deeply, but Daniel's mind was wide awake. He sat surrounded by old books, an oil lamp casting a flickering yellow light. One particular book lay open in front of him, dusty, ancient, with no cover, no title. Suddenly, his eyes froze on one page. There were words written in faded Arabic, but in the middle, a single line was written in Urdu: "Whoever touches the stone will be buried in his dreams." In the center of the page, a black, oddly shaped stone was embedded. It was neither round nor square, jagged, strange, and it seemed to be breathing smoke. Daniel reached out and touched it. The stone wasn't cold, it was burning, but Daniel didn't pull his hand back. His eyes went still. A shadow of fear spread across his face. The lamp went out, and red markings began to rise on the walls of the room. The room was now drowned in darkness. Daniel couldn't move. The red lines on the wall started to shift. They began forming words. "You touched sleep. Now sleep will touch you." Daniel shut his eyes tightly, but behind them appeared a graveyard, burned tombstones, cursed trees hanging with talismans, and shadows rising from the earth. Suddenly, a whisper echoed, an old woman's voice: "This stone is not yours." Daniel opened his eyes, but he was no longer in his room. The floor was dirt, the walls were stone, and in front of him burned a single torch. He was standing inside a tunnel, completely alone. At the end of the tunnel stood a decaying door. Written in blood across it were the words, "Azrael is waking." Daniel's breath grew sharp. He had never heard that name before, but a strange pressure filled his chest. Suddenly, the door creaked open on its own. Inside was pitch black, but far ahead, glowing eyes flickered in the dark. Then, a whisper filled the air: "You touched the stone. Now you cannot return it. You broke the seal. Now you cannot end it." Daniel turned to run, but the walls of the tunnel started closing in. The shadow that once danced on the wall was now standing before him. The shadow had taken human form, but its eyes burned red like embers, and its breath sounded like smoldering coal. "I am Azrael, king of the jinn. You disturbed my slumber." Daniel stumbled back until he hit the wall. His voice was locked inside, no words came out. Azrael stepped forward and took the stone from Daniel's pocket, but the moment he held it, he screamed, "This is no longer mine, another power has touched it. Someone else has marked it." Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. "You must now become its heir." Azrael's voice thundered, "In 7 nights, 7 dreams shall come, each dream will open a door, and behind each door, a sacrifice will be demanded." Daniel stood frozen, but in his mind, someone wrote, "The first sacrifice will be your sight." Suddenly, the ground began to tremble. The tunnel dissolved into darkness, and Daniel woke up. He was back in his room, but the walls were etched with blood-red letters: "The first night is over. You've already lost something." Daniel ran to the mirror. His right eye had turned completely white. Azrael's voice thundered, "In 7 nights, 7 dreams shall come, each dream will open a door, and behind each door, a sacrifice will be demanded." Daniel stood frozen, but in his mind, someone wrote, "The first sacrifice will be your sight." Suddenly, the ground began to tremble. The tunnel dissolved into darkness, and Daniel woke up. He was back in his room, but the walls were etched with blood-red letters: "The first night is over. You've already lost something." Daniel ran to the mirror. His right eye had turned completely white. Daniel couldn't understand if this was all just a nightmare or something much more, but his right eye was blind. There was no pain, just silence and fear. He turned toward the book again. Its pages were flipping by themselves. Page 7 opened. In the center, a new line appeared: "Second sacrifice, what you love the most." Daniel's hand trembled, and in his heart, the image of his mother flashed. "Martha, no, this can't happen." But once again, the room plunged into darkness, that same tunnel, that same shadow. And a new door appeared. This door was not made of wood. It felt like it was built from flesh and bone. Daniel placed his hand upon it. It was moist, warm. Like a wound, the door slowly creaked open. Inside, darkness, but in the center sat a chair, and tied to it his mother. "Mom!" Daniel cried out. But no sound came. Azrael's whisper echoed around him, "Love. The greatest weakness, and the sweetest offering." Daniel stepped forward, but the floor glowed with blood-written text, "One sacrifice. One release." The choice was his. Tears flowed from Daniel's eyes, his heart, mind, and shadow, all in conflict. "Please. Let her go." That was all he could pray. Then suddenly, his mother opened her eyes, but they were no longer human, black, hollow, and endless. "You touched the stone. We are no longer mother and son, you are now marked and cursed." The ground cracked. The light vanished, and Daniel was back in his room again. On the floor, in blood, it read, "The second night is over. You've lost your bond." Daniel was no longer afraid, he was broken. He picked up the stone again. This time, it was cold, almost dead. The book flipped again. Page 13 opened. "Third sacrifice, your voice." He tried to speak, but no sound came out. He wanted to scream, to cry, but silence held him prisoner. Then smoke poured from the book, and the walls of his room twisted again. Now he stood in an old, ruined seminary, dusty, abandoned, and echoing with whispers. Footsteps echoed from the rooftop above, slow, steady, like a weight dragging itself. Daniel remained still. He had no voice left. A shadow descended the stairs. In its hand was a rosary, but every bead was smeared in blood. Azrael's whisper came again. "This is where I was sealed. A priest bound me with talismans. That talisman is now with you. It lives in the form of that stone." Daniel looked up. There were no stars above, only darkness. Suffocating and eternal. The wall behind him read in blood, "Third night is over. Your voice is gone." Daniel could no longer speak, but voices kept echoing inside his mind. Azrael's whispers, forgotten languages, symbols of old. The stone in his hand began to warm again, as if something inside it had started to awaken. A new sentence burned itself into the wall. "Fourth sacrifice. Your shadow." Daniel looked down at the floor. There was no shadow beneath him, but then he saw it. In the corner of the room, something moved, something pulling itself from the wall. Crawling. It was his shadow, no longer bound to him. It moved on its own. It whispered, it circled him. Daniel tried to run, but his feet refused. The shadow now stood right in front of Daniel. Its eyes glowed red, and its fingers had grown long and sharp. "I am you. And you are no longer," it said, in a distorted version of Daniel's own voice. It began circling him, slowly, and with each circle, Daniel's body grew more transparent. His features began to fade. Azrael's voice returned. "When a man's shadow rebels, his body becomes hollow, just a shell. No soul." Daniel collapsed. The shadow walked away, freely, wearing his form. On the floor, in blood, appeared the words, "Fourth night is over. You've lost your identity." Daniel could no longer see his reflection. There was a face, but it wasn't his. He looked at the stone. It now pulsed like a heartbeat. The book flipped to page 17. And it read, "Fifth sacrifice. Time." Darkness swallowed the room. When Daniel opened his eyes, he found himself in a tiny, rotting cellar. In the corner, an old grandfather clock ticked, but its hands never moved. Time had stopped. A dusty photograph hung on the wall, a picture of Daniel as a child, but as he watched, the image began to change. The child aged rapidly, his face grew wrinkled, his hair turned white. Daniel reached for the clock, trying to break it, but his arms had no strength left. Azrael's whisper surrounded him again. You stole my sleep, I will take your time. The floor cracked, and in blood, it read, Fifth night is over. Your time is gone. Daniel returned to his room. Outside the window, it was morning, but nothing moved, no wind. No birds. No voices, just stillness. He tried to throw the stone away, but it stuck to his palm, as if fused with his skin. The book opened again. Page 21 now glowed. Sixth sacrifice. Sleep. Daniel sat down. He closed his eyes, but saw only terrifying faces. He opened them, and the shadows crawled across the walls. Sleep was no longer possible. The hours passed. Daniel's eyes turned red, his thoughts heavy, his soul exhausted, but he could not close his eyes. Azrael whispered, I was cursed to never sleep, now so are you. Until the final night, Daniel turned his face to the wall. There, written in fresh blood, Sixth night is over. You've lost your sleep. Now he understood what the seventh night would demand, and he was not ready. Daniel looked out the window one last time. The world outside had stopped breathing. The book opened to its final page. And in the center, one sentence burned into the parchment. Seventh sacrifice, existence. The stone began to glow. Its light filled the room. And Daniel's body began to fade. His hands, chest, face. They all dissolved like ash caught in the wind. Azrael's voice rose one final time. You are complete now. And I am free. Azrael's shadow took Daniel's place. Daniel no longer existed. No voice, no shape, no memory. But the stone remained. Cold. Still. Lying on the table. Then, the door creaked open. Hey, what's this? A new hand reached for it. Curious. Unaware. The stone blinked. A flicker of red light. Inside it, Daniel's final whisper echoed. Don't touch it. Don't. But the voice was too faint. And the hand, too close. The walls bled again. The book opened. And the tunnel returned. Azrael was free. But his hunger was eternal.